Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here, back again for another season of videos, and I know you're maybe itching to get stuff growing, or at least growing earlier this year, so how about today we discuss some ways in which we can get those coveted summer crops, or any crops really, earlier than usual, ways that are low cost, low infrastructure, high deliciousness. It's probably a thing, and there are ideas in this video that you can utilize with little to no cost, so let's do it. First, everyone assumes that you need a large heated tunnel to get things like tomatoes a few weeks early, and I'm not going to lie, that would totally help, but plenty of good tools and techniques are available to the average grower that help speed up the transition from nothing to something. The first things you can do to really get the season started early all start in the greenhouse or the prop house or wherever you plan to grow out your seedlings. These do not have to be fancy. The ideal greenhouse maintains good, consistent growing conditions throughout the day, from temperature to humidity to air movement. I've talked before about how little you need for an actual greenhouse in this video. Like the one we use is very simple, 15 by 30 structure with a single layer of UV treated poly. But what it has is access to water and ways to heat trays for germination and or keep them warm on colder nights in the spring and late winter. I will be doing a whole video on how to properly start and grow seedlings soon, maybe even next. But for now, focus on providing the proper germination and growing temperatures, sunlight, water, and air movement. If it's too cold where you're growing out seedlings, then that is limiting your ability to get that crop early. But if it's too warm and there's not enough light, either artificial or real official, well, that's also going to limit how early you have plant starts because they're going to get leggy. I should note that I am experimenting with different heating cables this year instead of heating mats, and so far I'm a little underwhelmed with the ones I decided to purchase, so I'm not going to get into which ones those were yet, but I will get back to you later on heating cables and those sorts of things. So I'm editing this video and I realized there's a whole thing I forgot to mention about seeds and which seeds you should buy that could be a lot faster than maybe other seeds you like to use. Paying attention, for instance, to days to maturity. So that is how long it takes for a crop to reach maturity from which you could harvest something. So some crops are really fast days to maturity, like Mokum, for instance, is like a 50-day to maturity carrot, versus Romance, which is more, or Bolero, or one of these others, which are like 70, 80-day carrots. So they take 20, 30 days longer, depending on when you plant them, the time of year. And, that can have a big effect on how early you get crops. And the same thing goes for tomatoes. I don't think people necessarily realize that determinate tomatoes are faster than indeterminates. Determinates just being the ones that kind of all produce at the same time, roughly. So those are a little faster than your indeterminates, which indeterminates are most of your heirlooms. So you could grow some of those and heirlooms, and that way you get some early and then some a little later. And also things like cherry tomatoes are a lot faster. So paying attention to those days to maturity and just the variety. And I guess style? Determinate? Indeterminate? Is that a style? All right, carry on, younger me. One other thing I do to jumpstart crops is prime a few that we start. Specifically peppers, tomatoes, beets, and spinach, though you could also prime corn, beans, and so on. We also prime some of our cover crop seeds. But anyway, priming is something I've increasingly become a fan of, where you soak a seed overnight, drain the water, dry it, and then plant that seed at some point in the next 6 months, preferably. The whole idea being you're sort of replicating what happens in nature. When a plant drops its seed onto the ground, it's going to get wet and cold until the conditions are right, both temperature and maybe where it is in the soil layers, to germinate. I did this whole video here on the subject of seed priming, which gives better detail, but the reason I'm including it in this video is because priming has been shown to increase the speed of germination and sometimes the speed to production, plus as a bonus, drought and stress tolerance. So that's one place to work from if you want to crops just a tad earlier. But that also doesn't cost you any extra money, and you can do your seed priming in the winter before you start your seeds in the late winter or early spring. And that will effectively, hopefully, contribute to healthier plants and healthier soil. Speaking of, if you're interested in learning a bit more about the growing methods we use on our farm and maintaining healthy soil, pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook, which, when you get it from no-tillgrowers.com, specifically, that helps support our work. And we can make more videos like this one. Only better, because we'll have a bigger budget. Nice. Okay, next, beyond the greenhouse, in terms of speeding up production, is soil temperature. Putting a tomato plant into cold soil is not going to get that tomato plant to production any earlier, and it can even stress the plant out enough to make it susceptible to diseases or pests, which is kind of the opposite of what we're going for. Raised beds often warm faster than non-raised beds. How do we not have a phrase for non-raised beds? Flat beds? Raisedless? Mounding beds, or raising them up in some way, helps to increase the warmth that can get around the and inside of the beds. Some people do use tillage to warm their soil early in the spring, and obviously I'm not going to recommend that here for several trillion tiny reasons, but you can dig your tomato holes a day or so early and at least warm the soil right where you plan to plant them. If you need to broad fork for compaction anyway, like to address compaction, as I've discussed in many a time in this channel, then that may be a less invasive, less destructive, and less weed-inducing way to get the soil exposed to slightly warmer air. Another thing people use is plastics or landscape fabrics. Perhaps you are already using large opaque plastics to kill weeds. Those can help warm soil, especially when used in conjunction with clear plastic on top in the early spring or late winter when it's still too cold for black plastic to do much. The clear plastic over top simply helps amplify the sunlight, enabling the black plastic to do its thing. The one I am using here is just old high tunnel plastic, so it's nice to give that stuff a second life anyway. You can also just use straight clear plastic on the soil surface. Just be mindful of it getting a little bit too sunny for too long and the soil drying out too much or getting so hot that it damages the microbial life. You definitely don't want your warming soil efforts to greatly harm your living soil efforts. Live next to a train track, they said. I don't think anybody actually said that. They were like, please, I wouldn't live close to a train track, it's loud. Now, back to the landscape fabric. A lot of growers love landscape fabric for its weed suppression abilities, but it can also warm the soil in the spring, which crops like cucumbers and tomatoes will enjoy. I don't like planting into landscape fabric because I just don't love dealing with all the little shards of plastic, or just like pulling out all the staples and dealing with all the mud. Just not my thing. But I will occasionally employ it to help speed up germination, like I'll throw it over a bed to kind of warm that up a little bit, or to terminate crops, or to indeed warm the soil slightly. Simply put it down as early as you possibly can before planting into that bed, thus warming up the soil beneath. So things like landscape fabric can be used preemptively and also in situ, meaning while you're growing. Another tool of sorts that can be used both before and during is row cover. I don't think people think about this a lot in terms of soil warming abilities, but it most certainly can do that. In fact, one way to reduce weed populations is called stale seed bedding, where you get a bed entirely prepared to plant and then you get it really wet and then you don't plant. Instead, you allow the weeds to germinate so you can cultivate them out. Then after the weeds are toast, you plant that bed. Doing that stale seed bedding with the addition of row cover can help speed up the weed germination underneath of the row cover as well as the soil temperature. Then, after a couple warm weeks with the row cover over a bare bed, you can remove the row cover, cultivate out any weeds, and then plant whatever crop you wanted there and recover it with row cover. It's kind of a clever little trick, just heating the soil, getting it warm just to get those weeds out of there. R30 is my go-to row cover. I use it for basically everything except for insect protection in the late winter and early spring. But I did a whole row cover breakdown as well in this video if you want some more insight on that and all the nuances. For hoops, I use 9-gauge wire and cut it to about double the width of the bed. So if you're doing 30-inch beds, I usually do 58 to 60-inch hoops. So that gives you, I don't know what that would be. Somebody that knows math could tell you how much height you get, but It gives you some height over your bed so that the row cover is not touching the bed. And you can just get large rolls of that at your local Tractor Supply sort of places. Now, there are also other hoops on the market, especially for larger crops. I use 1/2-inch metal conduit in 12-foot sections bent with this pipe bender here. Though, of course, you could just fashion your own pipe bender if you wanted to. For our low tunnels, especially in the winter and early spring, just to ensure no row cover is touching the plants, we put all of those up and then we put the row cover over it. Because anywhere row cover is touching when it frosts will burn the plant. You will need 10 to 12 foot wide row cover to stretch over the top of one of those, though you can also use greenhouse plastic or perforated plastics. Do not buy just any rando plastic though, it has to be UV treated. But you can create low tunnels as well. Just consider how you're going to vent those low tunnels and keep them in place for the wind, because although your goal is these tiny tunnels, you can just as easily build tiny ovens that blow away, which would be objectively sucky. Now, the next level of speeding up crops to production is infrastructure, like these beefed up Farmer's Friend caterpillar tunnels or this Rimmel greenhouse high tunnel. Rimmel actually helped me beef up those Farmer's Friend tunnels, which means essentially that I added a lot of wind stabilizing elements like trusses and a center purlin and hip boards and wind braces because, well, this happened last year, which was a hoot. One important note here that if you are in even a moderately wind-prone area, a straightforward cat tunnel without a lot of wind support can be risky. And from what I've seen, the Gothic styles do not hold up as well in the wind as the Quinset or Classic tunnel. That isn't to say you should avoid Caterpillar tunnels altogether, just to say that if you do go with a Caterpillar tunnel, opt for the wind support add-ons. Yeah, beef those babies up. Also, double poly, meaning double plastic, helps to add stability to a tunnel as well. It is worth looking into the NRCS grants for high tunnel funding also, here in the US at least. They are fairly slow, the NRCS, bless their hearts, but the high tunnel grants can be relatively easy to receive, especially for new and beginning farmers, disadvantaged farmers, etc. Getting into all the details on high tunnel construction is a bit beyond the scope of this particular video, but obviously having large covered space is an excellent way to increase your speed to production. You can also look at simple heating options for those tunnels like low budget heating cables that can sit on the ground, or more complicated heating options like propane to really get a jump on the season. I don't heat our tunnels save for a small amount of supplemental heating in our greenhouse, so heating options like furnaces and etc. are maybe beyond my expertise, but I am able to get crops to market early every year using these basic tools and techniques that I've mentioned that are pretty low tech and low budget. Like, there are other passive options, but I do not do composting in the tunnel or greenhouse for instance, for one, the logistics of getting so much material in and out of a greenhouse, and two, the gases they put off could be toxic to you or the plants if the ventilation fails. But if you're interested in that sort of stuff, we did a video a long while back with Sean Yodnicek about a system they developed at the farm he was working on then called Wild Hope Farm in South Carolina, which you can check out. I'll make sure to link it in the show notes, or, you know, here, one of the corners. Also, I should mention that we just posted our farm field days for 2024 here at my home farm if you want to see some of these things. The link to that will be in the description, and hopefully they will still be available by the time I post this, because that would be quite rude of me. Okay, well, like this video if you like this video. If you're not subscribed to the channel, hit the subscribe button, and if you are subscribed, you're awesome. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook at no-tillgrowers.com to support this work, or a hat, or other merch. Become a sustaining Patreon member at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers. There are discount codes there that will get you discounts on essential farming stuff like seeds and tools and boots. So you could, for like $2 a month, you can save like hundreds of dollars on your farming stuff while also supporting at least your third favorite farming channel, maybe fourth, probably in the top 5. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Welcome back for the 2024 season. We'll see you next week. Bye. Compression abilities, but it can also